Welcome once more to the Outcast Intellectual Podcast with the unfortunately sick and yet eternally stormtrooping Krislyn McGettigan, who,
Hey everyone.
was good enough to not use being sick as, a reason why she can't be here, because she definitely could have. Um, so, yeah, originally today was going to be the triumvirate of, I don't know, MVPs or whatever, But then, of course, Murphy's Law had to not coincide, whatever the fancy word is for fuck with things. And actually, Rebecca is on a plane right now, so she's not on the call.
But she's with us in spirit.
She is. And funny enough, I'm actually doing a marketing call with my buddy Lisa later on, and then it turned out that Rebecca was touching down just in time to be able to do that. So Murphy's Law is only half in strength, I guess, but we will make it happen. But for today, we are relying on the tangential thinking powers that we have together. And we were actually, I had to stop Krislyn and then start the recording because we were starting to talk about something that is cool, but obviously we don't want to have to talk about it twice, once recorded and once not. But it was about like medications and supplements and how the regulation for them is different. So I'll just let you continue talking about that now that we're online.
Well, I recently have sort of been able to learn more about this, like for a couple of reasons. But yeah, the way that, at least in America, that we regulate these different things, these different categories of call it what you want, like chemicals, whether or not they're natural or not, they're still chemicals, right? But things that can alter your body or your performance or whatever you're looking to change. So there's like, my understanding, 3 categories: medication, like prescription medication,
Right.
supplements, and hormones, which are like distinct categories. And the way that our government regulates them is different depending on what category they fall in. I don't know enough about this topic to be like, and here's how you get to be a drug versus a supplement. I don't know. But like, I do know that there are certain, you can have similar qualities in a supplement that are in a drug. Maybe not the same strength, and maybe not as concentrated in a supplement.
This is what I have her. That's what I get for having a psychologist on the call instead of a psychiatrist.
Yeah, right? God, that would be much cooler if I was a psychiatrist. It would be. I think I would be cooler as a psychiatrist.
Yeah, who knows? You might have never ended up in marketing if you were a psychiatrist, because it sounds like, they have some interesting, even kind of the ethics of that is like, I've heard before that there are like kickbacks or something from some of the pharmaceutical companies or whatever sometimes, which like obviously creates a huge conflict of interest. But I don't know enough about the specifics of that to really speak to it, I guess.
I have not followed training to be a psychiatrist. That actually looks a lot different than being a psychologist. It's 4 years of pre-med, and then you go to med school. And then following that, I'm sure that there's, just like any other doctor or medical doctor, there's some kind of follow up to med school where you're doing like a practical application of what you learned. But of course, didn't do that, don't know. What I do know is they make a shitload of money. Although still, for the amount of training they have, mental health is still, they're making like the bottom of the barrel of what people with their training are making. It's like them and family doctors make the lowest amount of medical doctors. And then as you start to specify further as like a dermatologist or a OBGYN or a surgeon, oh my God, if you're a surgeon.
Well, surgeons, yeah, that's kind of like the stereotype of like the highest paying like medical profession, I think.
Yeah, anesthesiologists, like they all progressively just keep making more money. But long story short, the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist, for anyone that's not aware, is it really boils down the most to being able to prescribe medication. And psychiatrists generally end up in this role where that's kind of all they do. You pay $375 for a half-hour appointment for them to tell you what drugs to do. Which is tough because at that point now, are they just pill pushers? Like they're not obviously offering any kind of therapy in that half hour that they're deciding what drug you should take. But yeah, and again, I don't want to overgeneralize because I'm
That's fine,
sure
yeah.
I'm sure there are psychiatrists that have more of a therapeutic like relationship with their clients in the sense that it's not just here's a drug, like here are some tools you can use. Let's like find other ways to manage the problem we're dealing with.
Yeah. It's interesting to me too, even in that sense that, I mean, it's kind of crazy if you think about it, that you can be a psychiatrist without having to include the training of a psychologist, because okay, great, like you know what this medication is supposed to do for that, but it's like, okay, but you still need to be able to perceive things well enough to make that, you know, the valid diagnosis, whatever, you know, like recommendation, you know, and so on. So it's like, how are you, I mean, you can't just say like, oh, this person has this behavior and so they need this medication. It's like, okay, but this fixes the problems in their life. How?
Well, yeah, very, very fucking good point. Just to be clear, I'm not 100% clear on the psychological training of psychiatrists and what they do get. But what I will say is that I would look at psychology as more theory based and psychiatry as more medicine based.
Right.
With psychology, there are a lot of useless psychologists out there. Let's just like call a spade a spade. You and I've had this conversation before. There are a lot of people that you're going to show up to their office and sit down and tell them your problems, and they're going to like nod and take notes and then tell you to leave. They're essentially like a sounding board for you. And then there are psychologists that are going to take a look at what your issue is and what solution you want to get to and help you make a game plan with that and help you with giving you new tools to cope with whatever it is you're dealing with. Obviously, whatever you have going on, it's going to dictate like how many different things they can help you with. But it's different than psychiatry in that fundamental way, because psychiatry is almost always looking for a pill to give you. And there are certain times when you do need a pill, you know, like bipolar disorder is treated really successfully with certain medications. Different types of like psychosis are treated really well with medications, but it's not most people who are going to these practitioners aren't suffering from psychosis. They're suffering from anxiety and depression. Like we see that outweighs every other mental illness by like a shitload. And if you want to put ADHD into that little barrel there of like what are the most prevalent issues that people are seeing mental health specialists for, there you go. That's like gotta be at least 75% of everyone that's going is anxiety, depression, and ADHD, which are real and require treatment and can very much interfere with your day-to-day life. However, now there's a couple of other things that we need to consider, because this is like, I could talk forever on this subject, but the way we treat those three conditions is starting to get more controversial. And there are a lot of different ways that we can treat it. It doesn't just have to be, oh, you have ADHD, here's some Ritalin. Oh, you have anxiety, here's a Xanax.
Well, thank goodness that we're thinking of different ways to address it, because it's like, and this is something that you and I have discussed on like another episode in terms of like how the sociology affects the psychology and in reverse, right? Because it is, to anybody who's paying attention, I think it's a fair generalization to make that people are not becoming ADHD, like in like genetically, there is not some proliferation of like, oh, people are stuck being like this permanently. It's fucking society.
Well,
Like
it's
it
our environment,
encourages people to be
right?
this way. It's like, oh, like like, oh, anxiety is prevalent. Oh, oh, you mean people are stressed the fuck out? And this is a thing that like again, and you know this, but like I'll reiterate this just in case like somebody, like in the future, like they're listening to this episode before like another one. They don't know what we talked about before. Um, which it's like there is the medicalization of what is just plain happening. And, I mean, that doesn't mean that certain people don't have, I mean, proclivity might not be the right word, but that for like people will experience things to different degrees, right? Um, but it does mean it's like, yes, you need to account for, I'm going to say this, like on the video, but it's like my phone, computers, the pace that we move, at things nowadays. I actually remember my girlfriend shared a video with me. It's qigong or whatever. It's like an Asian, think like meditation, like moving meditation essentially. And one thing that the doctor from that video was that he mentioned, I wish I could remember his name. One thing he mentioned is that uh, they've measured, recorded, whatever, that when you are like say having dinner or whatever, when you have your phone near you or something like that, it affects you physiologically compared to when people used to just, eat it, just have it at their damn dinner table. I don't know how TVs impact that, like cold cathode TVs. Like I don't know at what point that's sort of being like a big thing because there's attention and there's also just like the physiological element as well. And wireless, I imagine, probably has a much bigger effect than like the cold cathode stuff did. I don't know. My point being that even people's idea of what being at rest means
Oh, yeah.
is also drastically impacted. And so when you're taking into account, and this is one of the biggest issues I have with what I call pop psychology, that and I also figured out that I think the reason why Slack makes noise for the one client and not the other one is because I think it maybe changes it. But this is just me, just tangential thinking. But the issue that I've had with the popular psychology elements is that it is too quick to say that you have an issue when the issue may be outside of you. And so it's like if you put a normal person through war, are they like, do they have post-traumatic stress disorder, or were they just a normal fucking person whose like idea of life is I'm going to wake up earlier than I want to, go to work and do something I don't like, and then come home and not have enough free time to we were just walking down the street and my best friend just got blown the fuck up.
Yeah. That's
Like
not.
that is not, it's like I know that it's kind of like trimming hairs to say it's like, oh, it's like not a psychological condition, because you could say it's like, well, being affected by it would be, would make it a condition in that sense. But
Right, right.
for
We
me,
talked about that before too. Like, when is it considered a disorder? When it's interfering with your everyday life.
yeah, like
Yeah.
you're impacted by it.
Mhm.
But it's not like you have disorder in the sense of like, oh, there's something wrong with your brain, which
Right.
is, no matter what people say political, PC wise, is exactly what is being told to people. Like if you have ADD, people may, freaking pillow talk you into like not feeling bad about it, but you still feel like shit generally, you know what I mean? Like how have you felt about having anxiety and stuff like that?
um, yeah. I
But
mean,
you're fine.
it's funny because I've had people say to me before, "Oh, I have a phobia of driving on highways and over bridges." Me being the person physically driving over those entities, for anyone who doesn't know. Um, and it's funny because when people that I am acquaintances with sort of find that out, a lot of times what I'll get as feedback is, "Oh my God, I would never have thought that like you would be like that."
Right.
And I just kind of like take that and I'm like, that's fair because I'm typically a pretty outgoing person. I'm very social. I don't appear reserved or afraid in like a typical interaction with anyone. So some of the decisions that I've made in the last year or so could be perceived as gutsy from a career standpoint. It doesn't look like I would be afraid of illogical things like driving on a highway or going over a bridge. So it doesn't match their schema of who they thought I was. I thought you were normal. I didn't think that you had a brain thing that like
Right.
made you weird or different.
And funny enough, the fear thing, like even flying, like, okay, like maybe you're afraid
Oh,
of it, but in a certain sense, it doesn't benefit us to be afraid of flying in the sense that we're not the ones who are doing the flying. And so we're,
yes.
it's a very real threat, but it doesn't make sense for us to fear it because our fear doesn't allow us to change anything. But it's like, great,
Ah,
that,
that's
that,
a
that
key
makes
point.
everything all better, right? Like,
No, that is a key point though. It's outside of your control. So one of the issues I have with driving is it's very much in my control. And when
mhm,
I have a panic attack, I feel very out of control.
mm,
So that in my brain, I have this is very personal, obviously, but I've yet to find a way to overcome this fear because it requires me to be in control of a vehicle that can harm it.
mm,
Being able to get over my fear of flying, which I'm still very, very afraid of flying. I do, I should sort of rope it back into medication. I do utilize medication to fly because it is it is pinpointed to this specific event, and it is a tool among many tools that I have that supports me being able to do this, to get through it. I also use it for dentist. But without that tool, how I deal with flying and that fear looks very different. And for me, to this, like, I don't want to make anyone else feel uncomfortable. So if I'm having a panic attack and I feel very out of control on a plane, and someone else hears that and is like, why is that woman screaming? It's like not the greatest look, right? Um, so there's a lot of societal context of some of these things, right? Nothing exists in a vacuum. So
right.
even your personal issues, your personal mental health challenges and struggles, they have an impact on the greater world. And the reason you have them is also influenced by your environment and the society. Obviously, there's some exceptions to like very hereditary conditions, but
But
even in those cases, your environment's still going to,
unlock it is what I'd heard. Like,
well,
like stressors, or because that, I mean, that's what most of what I've from my reading, that's what I've seen. It's that, people used to think, oh, like hereditary means you have this condition and you have no choice and you're just stuck with this. And then with
yes,
time, as I understand it, it's like, you have, just like any other gene, you have the potential for that to be exhibited. Just why, it's like people will be confused when their parents, someone's parents are both blonde and they're, brunette, or both parents have brown eyes and they have blue, or it's like, just because you have a trait doesn't mean it's being expressed in that
well,
case.
right,
And
genotype versus phenotype.
I think you can turn it off too, right? Theoretically, haven't they been saying, well, or there's research to suggest that, it may be possible or whatever.
I think so. I'm not, just to be clear, I don't know the exact research on this, but if memory serves me, my understanding is that just because you have a proclivity or a genetic predisposition to have, anything,
Right.
um, it does not mean you're going to have it. Uh, your environment can be triggering to certain conditions 100%. And it can also be supportive for not seeing those conditions occur.
Right.
So I mean, this is the same. We see this with physical illness as well. It's not just mental illness, right? For example, my mom has a condition that is, if you have this certain gene marker, you could get this condition. She got it. I got a test to see if I have the gene marker. I have the gene marker. I don't have the condition. The condition in her was set off in her mid-30s by a really bad case of food poisoning. Somehow ended up triggering this
Right.
to come out and express that gene to express itself. Knock on goddamn wood. I have not
Yeah,
had
you
that
be
gene
careful
express
about
itself.
that food.
Yeah, and it may never express itself in my lifetime. right?
Right.
And it's very hard to, it's probably impossible to know if that's ever going to be triggered or what would be the thing that triggered it. I don't think it's
Right.
specific to food poisoning. But it's back to your point about like our society and what does it mean to be disabled or to have a condition or a diagnosis. If you're struggling with depression and you're barely able to pay your bills and your job is very stressful and you're in a situation where maybe you don't even have access to a window in your working space, you have no natural light, you're not getting any physical exercise, and then you go home and you eat packaged food, which there's no shade here, that's what you're into. But you're living a life that just constantly is your needs as a human on like a fundamental animal level, truly.
Right.
And it's like, well, oh, I'm depressed, I have depression. How much of that is depression, and how much of that is just the way that your life is
Right.
set up for you to be unhappy in it?
And how would you know? Because
And how would you know?
that's an issue I've always had with people that I've known personally. It says like, you just don't get it. Like I just have it. I can't do anything about it. It's like, asshole. If you could do something about it, you deciding there's nothing you can do about it would make it functionally true. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And
Yes.
so you cannot know. And this is why, like, and I think there's a stigma against people who are not really like super sympathetic about like elements of like depression and stuff like that. And at least for me, and from other people who think similar to me that I've spoken with, that is one of the big issues with it, is that the people who are saying I suffer with this, I suffer with this, I have this, I have that, are all saying I have it, there's nothing I can do about it. And you literally cannot know if that is the case until you wholeheartedly commit yourself to the notion of this is not the case. I'm not depressed. I don't have anxiety or all this other stuff. And you're actually committed to that idea and like take steps and all this stuff for like a year or half a year or something, and it still remains true. Because it's like people, I mean, I'm sure that you come across plenty of studies where it shows like the placebo effect is strong as shit. Like people will say it's like, oh, it's just the placebo effect. It's like, asshole, people, I remember seeing, I don't know if you mentioned it, but somebody did, where it's like somebody froze to death in a freezer that wasn't working. I
That
think
wasn't me, but that's incredible.
it might have been Adam. I don't remember it. It's sleep deprivation is a
I
bitch.
believe it's possible. I mean, I love that you brought up the placebo effect so much because I find it one of the most fascinating things in science. And it's funny because some research that I have recently been very interested in looking at is the work of Aaliyah Crum at Stanford. And
Okay.
she is looking at, and I hate this term so much, but it is the term that they're using at Stanford, so we'll go with it. But
Okay.
it's mindset. Gross, right? Fucking hate that.
Jared Harlan has entered the chat.
Jared Harlan's in a chat, but this is very interesting information because her interest also comes from being like vastly fascinated by how the placebo effect works, right? And basically how our brains are thinking about something can impact how our body reacts to it because they are connected. Duh. It should go without saying. But so here's a couple of examples of the studies they've done and the impact that you can like clearly see. One of the studies they did was on side effects of medication. So basically, if you're taking a new medication and you get the list of side effects, if you get a side effect, automatically sort of think that that side effect is because the medication is dangerous and putting you in harm's way, or there could be a dangerous outcome as a result, or maybe it's not working for you, or do you look at that side effect as, oh, the medication's working. I know that because I've had the side effect now, so it's doing what it's just part of that. Does that
Yeah, it's like even your perspective of what that side effect means
Yes,
itself is, yeah, an expression of that.
to perspective if we wanted to. So
Yeah.
what they did to test this in an experimental setting, they took I want to say children. I don't know what the age groups were, but they took children with allergies to foods, and they were going through some type of medical trial to, I believe it might have been exposure treatment, to try to lessen and essentially eliminate whatever the allergy was, whatever the food allergy was, peanuts, eggs,
Okay.
whatever. And one group, they divided them into two groups. One group didn't get any, group did get a pep talk about how you might feel a little tickle in your throat. You might get a headache. You might get whatever, whatever. That
Mm,
just means this is working. So don't be afraid if you get those. It just means this is working. And what they saw was incredible, was that the efficiency, like the effectiveness of the treatment was higher in the kids that had had that pep talk, where they were like, oh, it just means it's working. If they got the, if they had any, they were also more likely to stay in the study, whereas the people that didn't get that pep talk were more inclined to leave. She also did experiments looking at stress and how we look about the term stress. What are your initial thoughts that pop up when you hear stress?
I mean, I'm probably not the right person to speak to on this because I'm kind of renowned for, my, well, renowned in quotes, like in our program or a previous program. I don't remember if you're still in or whatever, but like for how I look at these things. So I don't want to take things off the rails, but I guess the way that I would imagine most people would see it is like stress is like it's just something that like compromises you and that makes it like you just can't function properly and such. I imagine that would be what many people would think about for it.
Yeah, and like we see studies all the time, or we see headlines all the time about how stress it's going to contribute to all these other diseases, and it's going
Mm.
to exacerbate all this other stuff, and like it's dangerous, it's unhealthy. But
Makes it true because people, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy where it's like, oh, like I have stress and what's going to go on if this happens, and like how is that, and like I saw this other thing that's going to make this, and then people actually make it the case, right? Because they have that
exactly,
perception of stress. Yeah.
exactly. So what, how you, the flip side of that is that stress is very functional. We
I mean,
can use it,
athletes.
athletes, we can use it to problem solve it. Stress is one of the number one motivators for focus. If you think about it, I have a deadline, I need to focus, I'm going to get so much shit done. Think about how much you do. Now, depending on how much stress you put on yourself and how you view that stress,
Can
you
go
know,
too far, right?
right. But if you only ever look at stress as something negative that's going to harm you, that
Yeah.
doesn't seem. So my point in bringing all of this up is to go back to like the person with depression, the person with anxiety, right? Person with any real illness. And it's like, do you have depression or anxiety? Maybe, probably. I mean,
Or
yeah,
even the notion of having it. Like, why
yeah,
do we think of it as, oh, you have depression? What if you're experiencing depression?
that's a great point
Is
too.
that
There
because,
are levels of this,
or
but
even, well, even just the notion of like, how do we know if something is having it or just experiencing it? Like maybe all of it is just experiencing it. How do we know to what degree the placebo effect is making the depression an actual physiological ongoing situation versus no matter how you thought about it, it would always be like this.
yeah.
So I didn't mean to interrupt
No,
you.
it's a really good point. And it really comes down to this perspective taking, right? If you believe, because this is what you were saying earlier, we're saying, well, I have ADHD, so I can't. Well, I'm depressed. So that means
Right.
those are, of course, there are certain things. Well, I lost my leg, so I can't go up the stairs the same exact way that you do. Okay, that's fair. You cannot use two legs to go upstairs anymore. Sure. But to say, well, I have one leg, so I can't go up the stairs. Really?
Yeah,
I mean,
you
maybe it's
can crawl.
uncomfortable. It's not something you'd want to do every time. Maybe you would very much prefer to use an elevator, but like
You can
you could go up the stairs. The point being, when you fixate on what you can't do, or what you can do, or whatever this belief on your abilities, right? That is something that you are training your brain to
Yeah.
make into your reality.
And
So,
oh, sorry.
yeah, no, that's the thought.
As a real world example of that, which is I think decently well known, is I think it's the 7 minute mile, right? I don't remember who the guy was that first broke it, but everybody knew you just cannot do this. You can't run a mile in 7 minutes, or however they perceived it. Oh, 4 minutes. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Thanks. And then one person did it, and then suddenly everybody started doing it. And it's the perfect example of like, okay, what did like, did he just release this fucking cloud of pheromones that like rapidly increased people's muscular endurance across the entire planet? No, it was people's perception of it. And I think a big reason why the approach to treating different situations, conditions, whatever, has changed so much is that people have realized this is not as simple, or to whatever extent people have realized this is not as simple as it was made out to be. I mean, people, even just the notion of heretically, is that even a word? My brain is like
Well,
being
heretic, like heretic.
yeah, okay, so yeah, sleep deprivation is a hell of a drug. Like you in terms of your genetics, you may like you're going to be like this. Now we understand it's like no, you just have the gene that can be expressed like this. We also like further understood it's like no, you have the gene that can be expressed and it's turned on by this. And further understood it's like it's expressed this way, but you can turn it off too. Is where like there's a amount of research that's pointing to it as well. So even just that notion, you think about it, it's like this is in your family, so will happen to you, to this could happen to you under these exact circumstances that may not happen at all. And even if it does happen, you may be able to deactivate it under another set of very specific circumstances or whatever. All this stuff. I think you mentioned, I don't know if it was on it was like a call of some kind, but when teachers were trying to treat, it was like ADD or whatever it was, as they call it, they like took kids outside to stand on the grass.
I would do that with some of my counseling kids. Yeah.
Air or to be in the sun and such. Like you had mentioned, I don't think it was on a call, but like in chat or something like that.
Oh yeah. This is amazing. Treatments for insomnia, right? Let's think about if you, or not necessarily being outdoors, getting natural sunlight. If you just went for a walk first thing in the morning, that was the first thing you did, it has like incredible like it promotes better sleep, a more stable baseline of dopamine, like it just, you receive the vitamin D through your skin, like there's like this cascade of benefits of like to enter your eyeballs, to get the sunlight on your skin, to as much of the skin as you can manage. Those if you just sat on your patio the sun for 10 minutes, you don't even want to walk. I don't even want to walk. Don't make me walk. Just sit on 10 minutes in the morning. But that doesn't fit into so many people's lifestyle, because what they're doing is they're waking up in the morning. I got to brush my fresh underwear and go to work right now. I will get my coffee, get it through the window. What the science is showing is that it's not the same to get that light through the window than it is to just like literally be out. Can you do your fucking thing? Humans are just big ass plants. Like we need water and sunlight and proper nutrition, and like you're gonna grow. And if you don't get those things, you're gonna be a very sad fucking house plant in the corner that just is in struggle city all the time.
Yeah, it's almost like some of these elements are just how you should be, and society is artificially, discouraging that behavior via, whatever kind of reinforcement loop, and people just assume that there's something wrong with them if their body doesn't work anyway.
Yeah.
Like if you like if you eat nothing but fast food, do you think you're going to be healthy? Probably not. So then why would you think, oh, like I'm an unhealthy person? It's like, no, you're eating an unhealthy diet, which makes you unhealthy. There's a huge difference between that. And again, that's another example of, people internalizing something where it's like your habit of eating somewhere that happens to be on the way to work does not mean that you are stuck being an unhealthy person for your entire life.
Yes.
Yet hilariously, people are all about mindset shifts and such when it makes them weaker, because they'll think it's like, oh, I can't control I just eat and I need to eat, or I need to do this, or I need to do that. It's like, okay, great. You're willing to think of these things and like, oh, like you need to do this, but you won't think that you need to do this or like need to do that. Like, so it is largely a case of like people will, there's the objective reality of something, and then there is what the person will see, which we know perceived value, in marketing, where it's like it's not like the value of something, it's what somebody sees the value of it as being.
Yes.
But that applies in everything, because people will decide like this is the case, and then they will make it happen. And this is a big reason why I personally choose to not, like, I'm not a fan of personality tests, something that me and my girlfriend have argued about. And among many other things, it's like, it's welcome to relationships and such. But like when it comes to the notion of like preset limits on things, and I understand that like many people see it as like a way of understanding something, which is also where she was coming from in that case. And I can understand that element. But to me, creating the limit is the problem.
Yes.
Like
I
people do,
I see both sides of that. Yeah.
yeah, and that's the thing for me. It's like, oh, like this is my personality. Why does that have to be your personality? Why does this have to define you? Because if this is an issue, I would rather it be something that I see as an aberration of how I am, not something that is, this is just how I am and I'm just stuck with it.
Well, limiting beliefs like that is like super weakness based. If you think, like, if you're looking at strengths versus weaknesses, right? Like,
You just need mindset.
I hate the term mindset so
I
much.
know, that's why I had to mention it, because I want you to go back to Jared and
Yeah, we
tell
talked
your
about mindset
master.
today. Yeah. But here's the thing, it's like, unfortunately, these have turned into cliches, like mindset, limiting beliefs. But
Right.
take that aside, like just don't look at it for a second. The cool part is your brain, the way you think, the way that you behave, all these things are malleable, which is incredible. That's like the coolest thing ever on the planet. Is that
Neuroplasticity is sexy, people.
oh, it's so fucking cool. It really is. It's amazing though.
I
Because
agree.
with for most things you face in your life, I'm not saying it's going to cure cancer, but I am saying that cancer patients who believe that they will get better, who believe their treatments are going to work, we do see it working better. So like
Right.
you are in control. And one of the things that gets me is when people are like, well, I'm not going to lie to this. Who says you're not currently lying to yourself?
Yeah.
You have
And
created you have maybe not, it's hard because like it's not 100% right. You didn't 100% create your reality with your thoughts. Other things happen. Like nothing exists in a vacuum, right?
right.
So people I will hear that a lot, that people are like, I don't want to lie to myself. I don't want to just brainwash myself into like being a happy person. That feels very inauthentic. That's a fair thought, except for that you're brainwashing yourself one way or the other your whole life,
And
all the
honestly,
time.
a lot of people are not saying that because they really mean it. They're just saying it as an excuse to not try to think more positively. Because that is the issue, is that people are amazing at coming up with excuses.
And isn't
find
that
the dumbest
interesting?
fucking person in the world, but they're still amazing at coming up with excuses. And I personally think that it is because people largely like lack of intelligence as we see it is something that's like a subconscious, the result of a subconscious limiting factor based on people's beliefs of themselves in that sense. Because it's like, theoretically, if a dumb person was just a dumb person, then also their excuses should universally be stupid,
Okay.
right? Think
Yeah.
about it. But
Yeah.
like if a dumb person makes a really, not a really good excuse, but a very nuanced, clever excuse, well, then evidently that stupidity in quotes, whatever, however we're looking at it, only goes so far. And so like when you think of, oh, like I don't want to lie to myself to be positive in that sense. I mean, sometimes, people do mean that. I mean, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right?
Right.
But often, or more often than not, I would generalize, which I have no problem doing.
I know.
um, uh, People are just using it as an excuse. It's like, oh, like I don't want to lie to myself about being positive. It's like, no, you just don't want to accept the responsibility of having to be in control of your attitude and
It's a lot of work.
deciding. Yeah.
It's a lot of work to take it off of autopilot,
Only
right?
if you think of it that way, Krislyn.
Well,
Don't
that
change
fair.
your
That's fair.
mindset.
I also believe though, like I think you're bringing up a lot of really good points. The one thing I would add to what you're saying is I think that this is an instance where dopamine.
Hmm.
Why do we have so many excuses for not wanting to do anything? Are people just lazy? Have people always been lazy? Is it this generation that's lazy? Like, you know what I mean? Like, this is
There
another
we go.
instant, right? It's
Look
another,
down on younger people.
no, so
Yes. It begins.
this is gonna sound like very like pokey, but one of my beliefs in life that I choose to believe in is that I believe people are doing their best. I really do. And if I don't believe people are doing their best all the time, that they're working with what they have, they're trying, then like I would turn into a very dark believer. But I do choose to believe that people are almost always doing the best they can with where they're at and what they have and what they know.
As they
And
understand things. Yeah, like they're doing
yeah,
the best that they believe that they can do, I guess is
yes,
the.
yeah. And that looks different for everyone. And it's really hard because the way you believe things, the knowledge you have, the way that where you are at versus like maybe there's a homeless person that's asking you for money and you're like, get your shit together. Two very fucking different states, right? But that being said, I believe this comes down to a dopamine issue. There's a lot of this that I believe comes down to a dopamine issue because when people hear dopamine, I think they associate it with like, oh, I'm happy. If I have dopamine, I will be happy. That is, it makes you happy, right? No, dopamine's actually a motivation. Dopamine is one of those things that makes you motivated. That's what fucking people love cocaine, Adderall, shit.
It's a hell of a drug.
It's a hell of a drug and it gets you going. It's an upper. We've heard of it as an upper because it makes you want to do things, right? So if you are, there's a lot of ways that we get dopamine every day. And this is like a whole nother fucking
It's whatever, like
episode of the podcast, right? Of dopamine. But if your dopamine's unregulated, which is not necessarily caused by depression, it doesn't mean that you have a fundamental issue. It is 100% influenced by our environment and our behaviors and what we choose to do every day. And if you are on your phone scrolling and getting that dopamine hit because you're watching reels for an hour or whatever they're called on whatever platforms.
thanks for helping giving me the algo juice, bitches.
Well, like if you are disrupting where your dopamine's coming in and how, you're not going to be motivated. We're fundamentally interrupting that, right? And so if you're not motivated, what are you going to do? Look for ways to not do shit because I don't want to do that.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing that, and it's funny as like as a quick aside, like imagine like once the podcast is bigger and it's like, oh, you said bitches. Isaac is a misogynist, confirmed. I use bitches as a unisex
You
disrespecter.
you is all bitches, no
Yeah.
matter your gender.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
But not to get any more sidetracked than I'd already made it be. When it comes to dopamine, and again, this is, it's interesting how it goes back to the choices people make, which is another reason why I don't generally feel very sorry for people. Is that, like, you take an example of like the dopamine, where, even if somebody was mentions like, you can control this, and you don't need to take a medication, you don't need to meditate, like you don't need to do anything aside from literally just stop consuming your stuff like a damn addict. Like you don't need to be on your phone, you don't need to go straight from work where you're on your phone pretty much every opportunity you can be, to being on your phone on the way home, to being on your phone while you're at home, while watching something else, while talking to somebody else, to going to sleep, generally having your phone in front of your face until you fall asleep, to waking up. And what's the first thing that virtually everybody does when they wake up?
Yeah.
Look at their phone. That is literally just a matter of do not do this. And all this stuff changes. And yet people will choose medications. They'll
Yeah.
choose expensive retreats and all this other shit that people, sell themselves on,
Yes.
because it's fine to say it's like, oh, like, big pharma, like scams, people are targeting me on Facebook. It's like, motherfucker, you chose to do this. Okay. Like, let's, yeah, these other things were trying to influence you, but you still had the choice of what you were going to do. You're the one who chose to not just put your damn phone away for half an hour or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Well, and to your point, real quick, when you're like
sure.
that, the idea of like buying, we're constantly on the internet to look for the next thing to buy. And as marketers, that's great for us. But also
Right.
for your dopamine, like your purchases and even your like the pursuit of finding the right thing to buy,
Yeah.
that also releases dopamine. That's
Adding it to your list.
its own thing. It's how you're trying to fill this. I think a lot of people are very afraid of their feelings. It's like, again, I realize I sound like I realize how I sound. I realize that I sound like a kindergarten guidance counselor when I say that. But we're trying to numb ourselves all the time. Your phone is essentially a numbing agent, right? Like, I don't have to feel too much. I don't have to think about my life if I'm on my phone, right? So that's a whole other thing. And then we're getting into addiction now, right? Where it's like, what are other ways people try to numb feelings that they don't want to have? I think we all know the answer to that fucking question, but it keeps now the spiral. It's like we're going downhill now. Like
Right.
these are different levels at which you can become maladaptive.
And here's the thing is, well, first of all, our buddy Mary Last Bell is actually in the comments. So
Hi, we
wanted
have
to
a
say hello
person
in
watching.
response. She's on a Pomodoro break, so she won't be with us for very long, but we appreciate you coming by, giving us your 5 minutes, or, part of your 5 minutes of actual life outside of, work stuff. But it is interesting because it's an expression of how you do anything. How you do one thing is how you do everything, to whatever extent, because it's like, notice how similar that looks to like every other form of addiction, because it's not even just about this substance or that substance or whatever. It is like, what is your response to it? And actually, you bringing up even just the act of shopping and such, not buying, shopping, because I do think that there's the difference between them, right?
Yes.
It makes me wonder, because I've never liked window shopping. I hate it. When it comes to adding things to a list, like, that can be a little bit different in the sense that, like, for me, it feels like I'm one step closer to having it. Which, I mean, you could argue it's the same thing, but my point being is that, like, I hate just going to a store to look at shit and then I leave and I bought like one thing of it all. Like, I hate doing that. If I want something, I want it. I want to leave the store with that thing.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, but there's a new phone out. I don't care. Can I come home with it? No, then I don't want to go there. Why would I want to see
So
something I can't have?
I actually do think that's an important distinction.
Well, just to I'll just bookend what I was saying. It would be interesting to see like people who enjoy uh, window shopping, like what similarities would be between that and like other addictive behavior or something.
I don't know that I've seen a study on that.
Like if there is a correlation at all. So that's what it made me think of. So I didn't want to talk so long that you would lose the other thought, but I
Yeah.
wanted to mention that.
Well, I think that there is a difference though, in like, I know there's no way I can purchase this item versus I'm gonna save these so I can purchase them later. Like, I'd like to do my
Right.
nails. And
Yeah,
right
so it
now,
was one step closer to rather than experience of.
right, I know I can get there. But something really important about this idea of dopamine and like how your brain is getting that hit, that's important to touch on here is this idea of I can't think of the exact term for it, and I apologize for that, but that
Oh,
you're
good.
in intermittent reward schedules, essentially. So
Yeah.
for example, so this works really well on your brain, and you can use this as a hack, which I hate the word hack, but you can use this as a hack.
Try this one simple hack will
Yeah.
unlock your brain.
Welcome to 5-minute crafts. Yeah, it is true though. You can use this with your kids. You can use this on yourself. The idea,
see, she's expanding the use cases.
the idea is that the reward should be random. And this is what your phone does so well, because you have the algorithm, it knows what content you want, but you don't always see a video that you like. You don't always see something that you go, oh, that's really cool. But you do see something like that enough that it keeps you scrolling, and you don't know. It's not like every fifth video, every fifth video, I'm going to think it's really cool.
That's
It's totally random.
Yeah, because, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Because I'm not generally on social media very much, mostly because I just always have something to do, but, and also because the newsfeed eradicator, #heart. Am I hip now? I'm communicating in hashtags. Sorry, I wasn't trying to make you spit your coffee out.
I'm hip.
But
I'm with it.
I noticed that, well, now I notice that when I spend like more time off of like Instagram than anything else, because I don't have it, like, I don't know if there is something for Instagram that like there is for Facebook to get rid of it. But my point being, I see a lot of girl stuff in my feed when I haven't been in Instagram very much. And by girl stuff, I mean, sexy stuff or whatever, even though I don't follow channels that do that.
Yeah.
I mean, like if you follow like a female MMA, whatever, you're going to see, somebody wearing a fucking sports bra while they're working out, right? But I mean, like things that are just, that I don't even, now that I think about it, like I normally just scroll past it because like, yeah, like generic fucking, basically softcore porn on Instagram baiting. No, thank you. But then I think it's like, okay, like if I never go there, if I'm not on these channels, then why am I seeing this? And it just makes me think, it's like, okay, maybe because I'm young adult male, when engagement is down, show what is a trending, attention grabber, hot chicks or whatever, to bring them back. So yeah, I guess it was just like a response to that it, you inspired the idea.
These computer programmers, the people that are building these algorithms, they are psychologists, they are sociologists, they understand human behavior. They are, and it doesn't need to feel so nefarious. I do think that there's a lot of negatives to this, as we've discussed this whole hour.
Yeah, I mean, most people could just fucking uninstall the app. You know what I mean? Like it does go back to personal responsibility. Like, plus, they're making it addictive, great, but you can still uninstall it.
I mean, there's good shit on there. I learn a lot of stuff on the internet. And I am a naturally curious person that loves learning new shit. So there's cool stuff you're gonna find on there that might improve your life in some ways. However, back to this idea that the people who are building these algorithms, they do know. They have the data. They understand how to make something that's going to keep you on it. That's the point. Because then they can sell more advertising space, and then they can make more money.
Right.
So
like, just because I don't spend more time on Instagram just because hot chicks are showing up in my feed doesn't mean the vast majority of young adult males are not going to be spending.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know that we're getting towards the end of our hour here, but I will say the biggest takeaway from today's episode for anyone who is listening is that you can change your perspective on things. It is absolutely possible, and it can impact your entire fucking life. So
Literally, like physiologically, like
yes,
believe in law of attraction, great. Law of attraction, makes that happen. Don't believe in law of attraction, also great. Physiologically, it's still a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
And there's just no shortage of, whether I'm not a fan of official studies and shit like that, because people can always, choose to approach it a given way. But even just in like daily life, it's like last week I had like a really stressful thing going on, like at the end of the week, like client related. And like it was really like messing with my head. Well, okay, but like why? Again, there's the action, there's the state, there's what's going on. But that isn't why I was messed up. Because, like I've taken steps to improve this or whatever. But it's not like, 100% everything is like, roses, suddenly now in that sense. So then why do I not feel the way that I did? Because people my favorite thing that I heard from my sociology class was when a person perceives a situation as real, it is real in its consequences. And that is one of the truest statements I've ever heard. It extends to fucking history, to why wars happen, to why relationships fall apart. Like it just connects with so many different things. And yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to never underestimate the power of your belief in something, because it literally changes it. And that is something that I think a lot of people lose sight of. It's that, it's like, oh, like this helped me through like a tough times. Like, no, your level of belief literally physiologically impacts you. So yes, if you're just trying to stay positive, then yeah, you're probably still going to be miserable, because trying to stay positive is like the least positive way to describe being positive possible. But if you're choosing to see things and enjoy them and such, and I can say from the perspective of not somebody who focused on the negative so much, but for someone who was like emotionally numb for a really long time, that like the experience, like when you start focusing on things, like I walked to the fucking pharmacy yesterday to like get allergy medication, and like I was enjoying the temperature.
Yeah, oh, it's such a nice time of year.
But I mean, I normally wouldn't care before.
Right.
It was just like, why do I care what temperature it is outside? I'm just trying to get to where I'm going to get my stuff. And it's like, there are times when that's beneficial, because it's like, you don't want to give too much power to pain, right? Or inconvenience and stuff. Like if you want to achieve something significant, then yes, you need to be willing to put off instant gratification. But then, if you enjoy things and let yourself enjoy things and focus on it, I can't help but notice that whenever I start enjoying things and like appreciating certain things, that other positive things just seem to keep happening.
Yeah.
And you
Crazy.
could say that I'm just seeing stuff that isn't there, whatever. But if things were going to happen this way or that way, regardless, the only sane, rational way to look at it is to choose to make it positive, because making it negative doesn't help. And making it positive, at the very least, affects your mindset. Affects your attitude. I had to get one more. I had to get one back in there. And as we're seeing, also just literally affects the physical world, and at least your body, your brain chemistry.
Yeah. And those bitches are connected friends. Like
They're gossiping. They're talking.
They are gossiping. You don't just like have this brain that controls this electric meat suit that you're walking around in. Like they're connected. They're not distinct. So just remember that. Just remember that, folks.
See,
you can do it. We believe in you. We believe you're doing your best at all times.
That's right. Krislyn believes in you. And I believe that there are no excuses, which means that I also believe in you in that other way. So, in conclusion, remember, we forgot.